It was the kind of lake house that seemed to have been forgotten by time, its once bright exterior now graying under the weight of years, its wooden planks weathered and creaking with age. Claire Bennett and her husband Jack had inherited the property from Jack's late uncle, a man they'd hardly known. They were told the house had been abandoned for decades. Standing at the edge of Black Hollow Lake, a place steeped in local legends and whispered tales of tragedy, Claire stepped out of the car, staring at the looming silhouette of the house against the still waters of the lake. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, and the scent of damp earth clung to the air. "It's a fixer-upper, but it's ours," Jack said with a smile, wrapping his arm around her. Claire forced a smile, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something about the place was off. There was an oppressive silence, the kind that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As they unpacked their things and settled into the old house, Claire noticed the oddities almost immediately. The floorboards groaned underfoot, the windows rattled despite the still air, and there was a faint, persistent tapping sound that echoed through the walls at night. Jack, ever the rational one, dismissed her concerns as the house simply settling after years of neglect. But Claire couldn't ignore the strange sense of unease that hung over the place. The lake, too, had an unnatural stillness, its surface almost like glass, reflecting the cloudy sky above. There were no birds chirping, no sounds of wildlife, just the constant, oppressive quiet. As the days passed, Claire's dreams grew more vivid, more disturbing. She often dreamt of the lake, of standing at the dock and watching as something moved beneath the water's surface, just out of sight. And in every dream, she heard the same thing, a woman's voice, faint but unmistakable, calling her name. One evening, after a long day of cleaning and organizing the house, Claire decided to explore the attic. Jack was busy fixing a broken window in the living room, leaving her alone to rummage through the dusty old boxes left behind by the previous owner. As she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, the air grew colder, and the musty smell of age filled her nostrils. The attic was dimly lit by a single small window that let in the fading light of the day. Claire carefully made her way across the creaking floor, her footsteps kicking up small clouds of dust. She opened one of the old boxes and found a collection of old journals, yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As she flipped through the pages, she realized these journals belonged to Jack's uncle. They detailed strange occurrences at the lake, house missing items, strange noises, and recurring nightmares about drowning. There were mentions of a woman who appeared at the edge of the lake, her pale form rising from the water only to disappear when approached. The further Claire read, the more uneasy she felt. One entry, written just days before the man's sudden disappearance, sent a chill down her spine. "The lake calls to me at night. I hear her voice, even in my dreams. She wants me to join her, to become part of the water. I can't escape her, no matter where I go. I fear I won't be able to resist much longer." Claire slammed the journal shut, her heart racing. The house groaned in the stillness, and suddenly, the tapping noise she had been hearing at night seemed much closer, much louder. She stood still, listening intently. It was coming from the floor beneath her. That night, Claire's dreams grew more intense. She dreamt of the woman again, standing at the dock, her long wet hair obscuring her face. The woman's pale hand stretched out toward her, beckoning Claire to follow. Without thinking, Claire took a step forward, her feet sinking into the soft mud of the lake shore. The woman's voice whispered her name over and over, growing louder as Claire moved closer to the water. Suddenly, Claire woke with a start, drenched in sweat. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at the clock beside the bed. 3:15 the house was silent, but the oppressive weight of the dream lingered. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, Claire slipped out of bed and quietly made her way to the dock. The night air was cool, and the lake was eerily still, its surface reflecting the pale light of the moon. Claire stood at the edge of the dock, staring into the black water, feeling an inexplicable pull to step closer. She shivered and turned to head back to the house when she saw a figure standing at the far end of the dock. It was the woman from her dreams. Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat as the figure slowly turned to face her. The woman's face was deathly pale, her eyes hollow and empty, her mouth twisted into a silent scream. Claire stumbled backward, her foot catching on the edge of the dock, sending her crashing to the ground. When she looked up again, the figure was gone. Shaken, Claire scrambled to her feet and hurried back to the house. But as she reached the front door, she heard a voice, faint but clear, whispering from the lake. "Claire." The next morning, Claire told Jack about what she had seen, but he remained skeptical. He dismissed it as a nightmare, a figment of her imagination brought on by the stress of moving into the old house. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something sinister at work. Determined to find answers, Claire visited the local library to research the history of Black Hollow Lake. What she discovered only deepened her fears. The lake, she learned, had a dark past, one that stretched back centuries. There were rumors of an old village that had once stood where the lake now sat, a village that had been abandoned after a series of tragic deaths. According to local legend, the village had been cursed. The townspeople had angered an ancient spirit that dwelled in the lake, and in return, the spirit had claimed the lives of several villagers, dragging them into the depths. Over the years, the lake had become a place of fear and superstition. Fishermen refused to sail its waters after dark, and locals spoke in hushed tones about the disappearances that had plagued the area for generations. Claire couldn't help but wonder if the woman she had seen was connected to the curse. Was she one of the villagers, a lost soul trapped in the lake, or something far more dangerous? That night, Claire's sleep was restless, haunted by visions of the woman. And when she awoke, she found something strange. Her feet were wet, as though she had been standing in the lake. As the days passed, the strange occurrences in the house intensified. Objects moved on their own, cold drafts swept through the rooms despite the summer heat, and the persistent tapping grew louder, more insistent. Claire could no longer deny that something was very wrong. One afternoon, while Jack was away in town, Claire heard a noise coming from the dock. She rushed outside, her heart racing as she scanned the shoreline. The lake was calm, its surface undisturbed, but as she stepped onto the dock, she saw it, the figure of the woman standing in the water, her head just barely visible above the surface. "Who are you?" Claire whispered, her voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she began to move toward the shore, her body rising from the water in slow, deliberate motions. Claire's breath hitched as she realized the woman wasn't walking. She was floating, her feet never touching the ground. Claire backed away, her mind racing. She needed to get back to the house, to get away from whatever this thing was. But before she could turn to run, she felt something cold wrap around her ankle. Claire backed away, her mind racing. She needed to get back to the house, to get away from whatever this thing was. But before she could turn to run, she felt something cold wrap around her ankle. The woman in the water smiled, a grotesque, unnatural grin that sent a wave of terror through Claire. With a final desperate cry, Claire was pulled into the water, the cold, dark depths closing over her head. When Jack returned that evening, Claire was gone. Her car was still parked in the driveway, her phone and keys left on the kitchen counter. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. The only clue was a set of wet footprints leading from the dock to the house, and then nothing. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Claire yielded no results. The police combed the lake and surrounding woods, but there was no trace of her. It was as though she had vanished into thin air, Jack was devastated, unable to accept that his wife was gone. He spent his days wandering the shoreline, calling her name, hoping for a miracle. But the lake remained silent, its dark waters offering no answers. And then one night, Jack heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, calling to him from the lake. Jack. Weeks passed after Claire's death, but the lake house didn't remain silent for long. Her disappearance stirred old rumors, and a group of paranormal investigators, intrigued by the infamous curse of Black Hollow Lake, decided to visit. They were led by Marcus Green, a seasoned investigator known for his unflinching approach to haunted locations. His team, Emily, a tech expert with a penchant for the supernatural, Ben, a skeptic and history buff, and Lisa, a medium with a troubled past, arrived one overcast afternoon, ready to uncover the truth behind the legend. The air was thick with an unnatural quiet as they unpacked their equipment. The house loomed before them, its windows still broken, but its presence felt far more menacing than any of them had anticipated. The lake, eerily still, mirrored the storm clouds gathering above, a foreboding reminder of the untold horrors beneath its surface. This place feels heavy, Lisa murmured as they stood at the shore, her voice barely audible above the light breeze. Heavy? Ben scoffed, pulling his bag over his shoulder. It's an abandoned house by a lake, not some ancient burial ground. Emily glanced at him, her brow furrowing. You've read the history, right? The disappearances, the suicides? There's something wrong with this place. Marcus remained silent, staring out at the water. His instincts told him something was watching them, lurking just beyond the surface, waiting. But that was why they were there, to uncover the truth. They needed footage, proof of the paranormal for their growing audience. As they set up their equipment in the house, a series of eerie occurrences began almost immediately. Their cameras, which were placed to monitor key locations like the living room, basement, and dock, began malfunctioning. Static disrupted the footage, and strange orbs of light floated in and out of frame. Even Ben, the skeptic, started to feel unnerved by the oppressive atmosphere inside the house. Lisa, however, was the most affected. As the team conducted their investigation, she began to experience intense, visceral flashes of the past. She could hear faint whispers echoing from the lake, calling her by name, and see fleeting shadows darting just beyond her peripheral vision. At one point, as she stood near the old fireplace, she saw a woman, a transparent, ghostly figure, standing at the dock, her wet hair clinging to her pale skin. The woman was Claire. Lisa gasped and stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. But before she could call out to the others, the vision faded, and the room fell deathly silent. The encounter left her shaken, her hands trembling as she tried to make sense of what she'd seen. Was Claire's spirit truly still trapped here, bound to the lake? That night, Marcus and Ben decided to explore the surrounding forest, hoping to find evidence of the old village that Mrs. O'Malley had mentioned, the original settlement that had supposedly been swallowed by the lake. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around them, their twisted branches forming unnatural shapes against the sky. The deeper they went, the more they found remnants of old structures, crumbling foundations, rusted tools half buried in the soil, and stone markers, their inscriptions worn away by time. It was clear that something had once stood there, though the village had long been erased from history. But as they explored, Ben found something unsettling. At the edge of a small clearing, he uncovered a series of old gravestones, each one marked with strange, jagged symbols that matched the ones Claire had discovered in the house. The gravestones were arranged in a perfect circle, as though they were meant to form a barrier. "What do you think these are?" Ben asked, his voice hushed as he ran his fingers over the carvings. Marcus knelt beside him, his expression grim. "They're markers, warnings maybe, to keep something out or in." As the words left his mouth, a sudden chill swept through the clearing, and the forest around them seemed to darken. The distant sound of water lapping against the shore grew louder, more insistent, as though the lake itself was waking up. Back at the house, Lisa's experiences were growing more intense. That night, as she attempted to communicate with the spirits using her pendulum, she felt an overwhelming presence fill the room. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air as her mind was flooded with images of the past. In her vision, she saw the villagers of Black Hollow standing by the shore, their faces twisted with fear. They were performing a ritual, chanting in a language long forgotten as they begged the lake to spare them. But the water had already claimed too many lives. The more they sacrificed, the hungrier it grew, until eventually the entire village was consumed by its wrath. And then Lisa saw Claire standing on the dock, clutching the same ceremonial dagger that had been used in the ancient ritual. The lake had marked her family long ago, and now it demanded her life as payment. Suddenly, Lisa awoke with a start, her body drenched in sweat. The house was silent, but she could feel something watching her, something ancient and malevolent. She knew then that the lake wasn't just haunted, it was alive. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. The team's investigation grew more dangerous as they delved deeper into the mystery of Black Hollow Lake. The spirits within the house grew more aggressive, manifesting as shadowy figures that moved in the periphery of their vision, knocking over objects and whispering in the dead of night. One night, while reviewing the footage from their cameras, Emily caught something terrifying. In the background of one of the recordings, just as Ben was walking toward the dock, a figure could be seen rising from the water. It was Claire, her pale, waterlogged form emerging silently from the depths, her empty eyes locked onto the camera. And then, without warning, the footage cut to black. When Emily tried to replay the video, it was gone. The file had been corrupted. What the hell is going on? She whispered, her voice shaking as she turned to Marcus. "We're not alone," he replied grimly. "We never were." Desperation grew as the team realized that the lake wouldn't let them leave. Strange forces seemed to trap them within the house's decaying walls, and the forest paths leading away from the property would twist and turn, always leading them back to the shore. Lisa, knowing that they had no choice but to confront the malevolent force, proposed a plan. She had read about the ancient ritual that the villagers of Black Hollow had once used to appease the lake, but the ritual had never been completed until now. "We have to finish what they started," she said, her voice firm. "The lake wants a sacrifice. If we don't give it one, it will take us all." Marcus and the others were hesitant, but they knew she was right. Armed with the ceremonial dagger and the ancient text they had uncovered, they prepared to face the lake one last time. On the night of the ritual, the storm clouds above Black Hollow Lake were thick and heavy, the air charged with an electric tension. The team stood at the edge of the dock, the wind whipping around them as they recited the ancient incantation, their voices barely audible above the howling wind. As they chanted, the lake began to churn violently, its once still waters rising up like angry waves. From the depths, they could see the faces of the villagers' ghostly figures reaching out, their hands clawing at the air, their mouths open in silent screams. Claire's spirit appeared once more, her form rising from the water, her eyes filled with sorrow and rage. She was not at peace, and neither were the others trapped beneath the surface. The ritual had been a trap all along. Suddenly, the ground beneath the dock shook, and the water surged forward, swallowing the team whole.